This is Steve Zeltzer. Today we're going to be looking at Major Tillery, who is a longtime fighter in the prison system for justice and has used his skills to organize the defense of himself and other prisoners, including Mumia Abu-Jamal. We talked with civil rights attorney Rachel Wolkenstein and Tillery's daughter, Kamillah Iddeen, about the case. So welcome both of you to the show.
Thank you.
Rachel, why don't you talk about how you got involved with Major Tillery and his long legal struggle?
Well, I'll begin with 2014. I met Major Tillery when he was in general population at SCI Mahanoy, along with Mumia Abu-Jamal, and they became very good friends very quickly. Major was known to Mumia for years as a really very impressive jailhouse lawyer. So basically, I got to know, knowing his reputation, but he contacted me because he wanted help in continuing the fight that he'd had since the time he was convicted back in 1985, to get new evidence of his innocence and the frame up, and to help get a hold of records and everything to make that happen. And I began working with Major. And when that period of time, we communicated a number of times. And it was at that point that Mumia Abu-Jamal was sent on an emergency basis to the hospital because he had had a diabetic, basically failure, almost a coma, and was rushed on an emergency basis to the hospital, really with possible death. When I came back to the prison shortly after that, I came on a joint visit to see both Major at one time and then to see Mumia, and I was there with Mumia's wife, Wadia. It was the first visit of anybody seeing Mumia after he had gotten out of the hospital. And I learned from Major that he had complained to the superintendent like a month before, saying that that Mumia was at risk of death, and said to the superintendent, "You have to get this man to the hospital right away." And the superintendent said, "Oh, go mind your own business, take care of yourself." And Major said, "This is myself, because I stand in solidarity with my brother Mumia." I learned that for the first time seeing Major that day. It was in, I believe, in early April in 2016. And then I went to visit Mumia, and Mumia confirmed that and more about how Major tried to help Mumia throughout all of this. Wadia, Mumia's wife, and I publicized both Mumia's condition that day, but also Major's very critical role in reaching out to the superintendent and trying to get this help for Mumia. The very next day, I learned after the fact that after this was publicized, Major was sent, like at the crack of dawn, to another prison, to SCI Frackville, which had a reputation of being extremely harsh. And they had been very brutal to Major some years before when he was in that prison. And it was a retaliation, quite clearly, for the fact that he had defended Mumia. Not only that, but that the fact of the type of ignoring of all sorts of both medical and also calls for help from another prisoner was disregarded, ignored by SCI Mahanoy. And because of that, Major was retaliated against. He not only was sent to that prison without his legal papers and everything, but within a few days, they framed him up on some bogus drug charge of sending in Suboxone underneath a letter, underneath a stamp, which is totally absurd. Major's never had any drug issues in prison. He would never be so stupid, as he put it, to even put something under a stamp when he knew perfectly well that the stamps are removed. So, I mean, just even on that basis, it was just so ludicrous. But nonetheless, he wound up doing 4 months in solitary confinement. And this was a point of time when we were also beginning, which the prison knew, to work on the beginnings of this new fight for Major's case and to overturn his conviction. So that's how I grew to know Major. And over the course of the next, well, now I realize it's almost 7 years that I've been working with Major. He is somebody who has always, quite uniquely in a lot of ways, shown leadership within the prison system as a prisoner advocating for other prisoners. And back in Mahanoy, I'll try and keep this just a little tighter, is back in Mahanoy when he was helping Mumia, he was also filing all sorts of grievances against the rash that a lot of prisoners, including Major and most spectacularly Mumia, were getting from, figured out later, from the water, the toxic water, which is from the fracking in that whole area. So Major filed these grievances not for himself alone or even primarily, but for all the prisoners there. And that was his whole history while he was also advocating for Mumia. And that's continued throughout everything. So I've worked with him very closely and with the support of his family. Kamillah, you'll hear from her, and other members of the family to help get the evidence for Major's innocence. And that's a whole other story of basically corroborating what Major knew, that it was a total frame up, an invention of all the evidence against him. And we learned in the course of that just how gross it all was, that the evidence against him was totally manufactured. The person who was the snitch, jailhouse snitch, who testified against Major at his trial, the only evidence against him at all wasn't even there at the scene. It was a totally manufactured statement. And this has now been fought and being fought still through now into the federal court.
We're speaking with Rachel Wolkenstein, and she is a lawyer who has helped represent Mumia Abu-Jamal and also is fighting for Major Tillery and talking about his story and his role in defending other prisoners as well as himself. And also joining us is Kamillah, who is the daughter of Major Tillery. Welcome to our show. Kamillah, why don't you talk about your struggle to defend your father, who your father is, and why you have spent a good part of your life fighting for his freedom.
You know, being a 5-year-old little girl, you couldn't do much, but that's around the time that my father went to prison, was incarcerated, you know, when I was growing up as a little girl. And for me, you know, it was very hard growing up as a little girl, and me and my siblings just growing up without a father who got a lifetime sentence, and you really didn't understand why he got this lifetime sentence. And you heard over the years that it wasn't just one, it was 6 consecutive lifetime sentence. And I'm saying, what could he have done so brutally to deserve, you know, that type of incarceration? And then to grow up as an adult, and then you find out that people fabricated stories, and that, you know, the one jailhouse snitch, you know, he just admitted that it was all a lie. And then you say, okay, imagine what this has done to not only me, but my whole entire family. You know, just throughout the years of being able to help my father within the prison walls. I'm a nurse, so naturally, medically, and I'm not only, you know, a nurse, but I went to school to be a medical assistant. I did that for 8 years. Then when I was going to nursing school, I became a patient care assistant, which, you know, just going into people's houses, still in the healthcare field, but just did that for 4 years. And my father, you know, as he's grown older and his medical conditions and having to deal with this prison system, it's brutal. One time they called me, and this was in 2011, and told me that my father had a diagnosis of liver cancer. And I'm at my job, and I literally just go into the bathroom and begin to cry, because you just have no closure. Like, I haven't gotten to, you know, live out a fulfilled life with my father. And so you just have no closure. And then because I'm in the medical field, you know, I start asking, well, did y'all do a biopsy? Did y'all do this? Did y'all do that? And then when I found out that they hadn't done any of that, and the only reason why they were calling me is because they wanted me to make a decision that if my father became unresponsive to pull a plug. That was absurd to me. So what I did was, me and my uncle at the time called up to the prison, and I talked to the superintendent. And when I say I made noise, people called, they made noise, me and my uncle was able to walk inside the prison through the yard where other prisoners was, and we were able to go into the infirmary so I can lay eyes on my father. And when I got there to my father and I said, do you know that they diagnosed you with cancer? And he said, this is my first time hearing of this. They sent the doctor in right away, and the doctor couldn't even explain why. And I said, go get the imaging. The only imaging they did was an MRI that showed that he has a hepatic shunt, which it allows, the shunt allows like your bowel and all of that to, because your liver is just to detox anything that comes into your body, whether it be medications, whether it be, food, whether it be alcohol. It's just like a detoxer. And so the hepatic shunt helps to, your liver to be able to function to detox all of that stuff. And his had gotten clogged, and he became like real critical to where his bilirubin was so high, he was jaundiced. And it got to the place where, because my father has made so much noise for other inmates, they start making noise for him, because he said he laid down on that floor and he said he could hear one of the guards say, I think that he's dead. And he said, when I heard that, he said, whatever strength I had mustered up, I got up off that ground and I said, I'm not dead, I need help. And they took him to a hospital, an outside facility, and he was able to get the help that he needed, because he had, even though they had diagnosed him with cancer, he had issues with this shunt for quite a while before he was actually able to get the medical help that he needed to get it replaced. It was a huge ordeal.
If you hadn't been able to help him medically, he might have died
He
under
may
the
have.
treatment. Yeah. So
He
you
may
basically,
have.
yeah, you basically
Yeah.
saved his life. And how old is your father?
Right now, he's 71. He's getting up there in age, He's getting up there in age, So.
And the situation of families such as yourself throughout the United States who are fighting to protect their loved ones, it must be traumatic when
It is.
You don't really know what's going on. You can't believe what they even say about what's going on with your father.
Well, one thing I understand, that the medical attention and medical technology is not the same like we have out here. And me being a nurse and working in COVID from the time that it presented itself till now, I had COVID myself back in April 2020. And my father called me every day. He called me every day. I didn't have it as severe as most people, but I had it enough to where, I had it. And then turn around, and then my father, contracted COVID, but he had to keep going back to the infirmary, because he kept on complaining to this one doctor that he had shortness of breath. He said it felt like an elephant was sitting on his chest. And I had to keep calling. I'm saying, why aren't y'all testing him? Well, they wanted to say, he had bronchitis. We put him on different antibiotics. And I said, and they kept on saying he doesn't have a fever. Well, guess what? I never had a fever either. All I had was symptoms that felt like a sinus infection, but my doctor still tested me anyway. And you may not have a fever. You may not have even shortness of breath. You may just have some, let's say, nausea, vomiting, or you may just have some diarrhea. You may not have all the symptoms that they say that go with COVID, but still, at that crucial time, they should have tested him. And the excuse was they didn't want to waste the test not knowing. And then even they did take a temperature on him, and their excuse was, well, Muslim men wear kufis all day long. And so they believed that when they took his temporal, you know, that's on your head. When they took his temporal temperature, they believed because he wore his kufi all day long that boosted his temperature up. And I said, how ridiculous is that? I said, well, that gave you a temperature, so now y'all can test them. But it still took them a while to test him. But when they finally tested him, he had COVID. And I just said, how many people were you around? Like, how many people did you expose? Not only inmates, but guards too. Okay. I said, you would think that they would try to preserve the people, their staff. You would think that they would try to preserve their staff, but no, they said that they were trying to preserve tests. And then after that, when he got put in isolation, I called the one medical staff woman that she is great. She talks to me. She hears my concerns. Any test that I ask her to give me the numbers, she gives me the numbers. She allowed me to be able to get updates on my father every single day. But without her, I just know I would have had to make a million phone calls. I may have even had to call the superintendent, but thank God that he made it through it. So, I'm excited about that. I mean, he has heart condition, like my dad, he had a heart arrhythmia where he complained about that, shortness of breath for, weeks on end before they did an EKG and found out that he was in an abnormal heart rhythm that could have been critical for him because atrial flutter, your heart can't function in atrial flutter all day long. Your heart will begin to throw clots, which he's on Coumadin now for, which is a blood thinner. But to even have to fight with the facility to take him to go see a cardiologist because, y'all don't have the technology that cardiology on the outside has. He needed an echocardiogram. He needed an ablation, which is to shock your heart back into the right rhythm. So we had to fight with that too. It's a lot within this prison system to try to get your family the medical attention and the medical help that they need, moving forward as they get older. I always tell people, my dad is not the same dad in his 20s that he was, that he is now in his 70s. He's an older gentleman. He's an older man. He needs more medical attention. I'm asking him about his high blood pressure all the time. I ask him about his arrhythmia all the time. I ask him, he's more concerned now about maybe some residual side effects of COVID that, the world hasn't even discovered yet. But, all you can do is make noise and call, and you can call them every day if you have to. I have called every day, until somebody moved. One time I was standing on Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, and they told me I needed to get off of their premises, but I was standing on DLC, their main facility over in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. I was just standing on their premises demanding to talk to Wetzel. I was demanding to talk to Wetzel just to get something done for my father, because you feel like it's you against them. You just feel like it's you against them. And it's like, hey, don't you have a father? Don't you have a brother? Don't you have a son?
We're talking with Kamillah, who's the third daughter and sixth child of Major Tillery. And Kamillah, did your father ever talk about the retaliation against him, not just because he was using his talents, legal talents, to support Mumia Abu-Jamal with others? So did your father ever talk about the work he was doing to help other inmates and also other prisoners, and also the retaliation that he faced for helping to represent other prisoners?
I know he had a case where he was talking about like just the inhumane conditions that the inmates were living in. And he won a lawsuit. And next thing I know, he was leaving the DOC and they shipped him off to Jersey. And so for a long time, he was in Jersey, you know, state prisons. And so we would have to drive up to Jersey to see him. And then when he started complaining about the conditions in Jersey, then they no longer wanted to deal with him and they shipped him back to Pennsylvania. They don't like that he's a noisemaker. They don't like that he's not going to just sit there and let people treat him any old kind of way. You know, they don't like that. But I do have some COs that have shared with me that, you know, your father's doing great things. And, you know, they talk about some, let me say that, have said that he's done great things, and some have appreciated the things that he have done within the prison walls. But for me, you know, I say, well, that's all great, but, you know, put yourself in my shoes, that, you know, the great things that he's done for other people in there, imagine the great things that he could have been doing for his children out here. But he did send me a brochure of the prison elderly program that he's a part of. Well, he's the, it says founder and director, so he's doing that, you know, of just trying to get inmates under the age of 50 the proper, you know, medications that they need, the proper testing, that, because when you reach a certain age, you know, at 50, they tell you, hey, now you need to go get you a colonoscopy, you know, so you can get your colon checked out. At a certain age, they do screenings that you need moving forward as you get up there in age. And so those are the kind of things that he wants to make sure that inmates are getting, and inmates are being, you know, checked out as far as their health. That's, you know, part of this program, because so many times it gets missed within these prison walls, because they don't look at them as human beings. They look at them as just a number, you know. It's just, you know, what they do.
And Rachel, you've spent a good part of your life as a lawyer representing prisoners, working with Mumia and also working with Major Tillery. The struggle to protect them, I know that there was a struggle around hepatitis, getting proper drugs. It seems like it's a never-ending struggle to make sure that prisoners have medical treatment while they're incarcerated. You've spent a good part of your legal professional life fighting for prisoners, Mumia Abu-Jamal and now Major Tillery. This fight around protection of your health has led to a lot of struggles, particularly around hepatitis. Why don't you talk about the long struggle in the prisons to protect their health and make sure they're treated as human beings?
Well, basically, Mumia, it turns out, of course, that huge numbers of prisoners have hepatitis C. I mean, they figured in Pennsylvania prisons, about 6,000 have hep C from their times before, obviously, they got into the prison. And Mumia, one of the discoveries in the course of treating Mumia for this diabetic coma and the skin disease and everything he had was actually recognizing or seeing in tests that he had hepatitis C. And that began a lawsuit, which Mumia won, even though it's still technically still continuing over damages for him, to get the prison system, the DOC in Pennsylvania, to grant hepatitis C treatment for Mumia. And he won that. It was a big struggle throughout all of that. And Mumia is very happy because his decision is something that, while it wasn't a class action, technically representing every prisoner, provided a precedence for other prisoners to be able to get hep C treatment. Major Tillery is one of the people who did. he had hep C too. And this was basically, even though there was testing done and it showed up in prisoners' blood tests that were taken, it was not treated. It wasn't, nothing attention was paid to it at all, not at all. And so Mumia's case that came from this extreme situation he had basically opened up the door for a lot of prisoners, like basically most of the prisoners who have hep C with some fight. It's not automatic. They set up a protocol, but all of it is very severe. And the original settlement or the original new protocols that were set up by the DOC at the sort of the end of Mumia's case was basically saying they would start treating people with the antiviral medications that they had when they already showed the signs of basically bleeding into their throats, which is already at end game basically. So that got sort of pushed back and overturned, and the particular judge that Mumia had in his case basically said that the cost of hepatitis C treatment should not be a bar for prisoners getting it, and said that that is something that all prisoners should have. At that point, the hep C medication, the cost of it to the DOC was $100,000 for a course of treatment, whereas I think in Egypt and in India, it was basically about $1 a shot. And that is like 90 shots. It's like 1 shot a day for 90 days. Now they've done some other antivirals that are a little bit less. Major did get it. And what that does is so did Mumia, that stops it's sort of like a cure of the hep C, but it doesn't change the damage that's been done to people's livers. And that's damage that's like a hidden, a hidden disease for people in terms of what you see in the overt symptoms of it. It just eats away at your body and the functioning of it, and has many, many side effects, including things that are not just the apparent ones like the cirrhosis of the liver and liver failure, but it's also forms of rheumatism. It's also the skin disease, etc. So as Kamillah graphically explained, to get any sort of minimal health care for people in the prison really requires an advocate, a family advocate. I mean, Kamillah has saved Major's life, in my opinion, many times over, and has been that. But for her and other family members who, can do comparable things or do that and have the, make the access, because the access isn't there. You have to fight for it. Kamillah fought for it over and over and over again, as you can hear. And basically what Major's tried to do from the inside is to advocate. He advocated when hep C showed up in the prisons or became known and stuff, is that the DOC should test every prisoner. And he did that, and that was totally ignored. Now the superintendent where he is now at SCI Chester wanted that to happen, but the DOC Central prohibited that from happening. And Major's, the program that has now been accepted by the DOC, it's now basically a model program. It's hopefully going to be spreading to every prison in the system, is one for seniors, a life enhancement program, which is intended for both giving seniors a little bit of space and time from the younger guys, but it's also a way of helping for reentry programs to people. It's also a hospice program, basically to allow there to be other prisoners to be there for prisoners who are at end of life in the infirmaries and don't get out, and a whole variety of things. And now it's being expanded, Major told me, to deal with the younger guys as well. And the point that Kamillah makes about what Major would be like for his family, yeah, that's something, but he would be like for the whole community. And what's happened at SCI Chester after Mumia won the retaliation lawsuit, after he was shipped out from helping Mumia, that basically there's been a more open ear there, fairly uniquely. But Major's made that happen. The man is a leader with great integrity and an amazing ability to actually fight and stand up for himself and for other prisoners. And at the same time, do that from a position of strength. I don't know how to explain that. I would say that he's not, he doesn't grovel. Now, he's not a groveler. He doesn't get anything by, making nice in a disgusting, obsequious way. He does it through fighting with strength and showing that he will be respectful so long as he and other prisoners get respect. He demands that, and he's achieved that. And that is a unique capacity for somebody. So you can see I have intense, deep respect for the man, his leadership capacity, his humanity, his integrity, and what he is now doing to try and ameliorate some of the worst harshness of prison is the type of thing that he would provide leadership on the outside. And that brings us from the thing that he's fighting for exoneration, for justice for himself after all these years in terms of the prison, but also if need be, he's got a commutation petition. And it's a commutation petition based on the fact that he is actually innocent. He's not only actually innocent, but he's a person who needs to be out, and using whatever means are available to him within the legal system to fight for both exoneration and to get out of prison now. He does not want to die in prison and looking at the faces of the people. However, some of them are decent people and have been good to him, so to speak. He does not want to die inside prison. He wants to be with his family and out in the community, and helping is what he wants to do and what he's been doing all the time. He's tried so hard while he's been in prison.
And we're speaking with Rachel Wolkenstein, who is an attorney who helped represent Mumia Abu-Jamal and now is focusing on Major Tillery. And what can people do who want to support his struggle for justice and to get out of prison so he can continue his life and be with his family and fight this frame up that he's been involved in?
Need public support, of course, and there is now a petition that's filed on change.org. It's very simple, change.org /free Major Tillery, all one word. And it's a petition that lays out in short what we've been talking about in terms of Major, who he is, what he's all about, his case, as well as his advocacy for other prisoners. And that gets signed, it gets sent to the district attorney's office to demand that his conviction be reversed and freed, and also to the Board of Pardons to grant his commutation petition, which would get Major out of prison at least, even though it's still on parole. So that's one thing to do, and also to go to his Facebook page, which I think is at Major Tillery. I'm told by his nephew who set it up that Facebook wouldn't let him say Major Tillery for some reason. Major is his first name, his real name is Major George Tillery. It's not just a nickname, it's his name. But at any rate, so to go those places, and we're hoping that we will be able to spread around this interview. Steve, thank you very much. We'll give people so much a better understand of Major and his family and everything, and to help with the fight for him. And those are concrete things to be done, and we will keep things posted and updated as to what's happening with Major, his struggles in the prison and his fight for his his freedom and his exoneration.
And I mean, of course, there are others, Kevin Cooper, who also is fighting for justice.
Yes, so many. The whole system. The system is a frame-up system. It's a frame-up system. That's my position. It's a frame-up system from beginning to end, and racially motivated, racially biased, class biased. That's what it is. And so, what Major's case has done in a lot of ways is also point to particulars of the type of way the frame-up system works. And, one of the things that's been publicized just recently in the Philadelphia Inquirer, dealing with, I'll just say, the sex for lies, which sometimes people get really sort of shocked to people. But in addition to just beating the shit out of people, which is what the police have done a lot, they have also, in various terms of coercion, of threatening them with murder charges for things that they know they didn't commit, to either confess or to be witnesses against people and making stuff up. They also developed in the early 80s a sort of a sweetener for informants, jailhouse informants who were facing lots and lots of charges themselves, which was to lie on other people, and Major is one of those people, totally make up the stories and stuff, but also provide them, which what we've called Sex for Lies is the name of this Inquirer article, which they provided with the informants with confidential time in the jailhouse, not the jailhouse, in the homicide headquarters interview rooms with their girlfriends, their wives, with, you know, prostitutes, whatever, to engage in have sexual encounters with them in exchange for their false testimony. So I found sometimes people find that like so unusual that it sort of strikes them even more strongly than sometimes the more brutal things that are said. But it's yet another means, any means, to convict people who are innocent by the police.
And these police who have engaged in this, have they been prosecuted?
Oh, of course not. No, of course not. No, they're still protected. I mean, the people that have been exposed now from the 80s are now pretty much gone. But no, there's very few prosecution in almost any of these cases, even with the many, like I talk out of Philly, there's been what, 21 or 22 people who's had their convictions reversed. Those police are not prosecuted. In Brooklyn, where they've gone after all of these detectives and actually reversed, you know, many cases. There's just another round of getting rid of convictions by one homicide cop. I think they reversed about 100 drug convictions recently. Those cops are not prosecuted. And generally in the prosecution, even in a lot of the so-called exonerations out of Philly are not really exonerations. What happens is the DA's office, Krasner's office, comes in and they say, well, you know, there may be some problem here. You know, we're not sure, but, you know, we don't really know who did it and they won't really tell us who did it. And so therefore, you know, we're going to say, well, you know, there's a little bit of problem. So either cop a plea to something that allows you to get out of prison, because everyone who's listening may not realize Pennsylvania is a life without parole state. You've life without parole for all sorts of things, you know, for second-degree homicide, but also for various types of assaults and things like that. That's life without parole. You do not get out unless you die in prison, unless there's some reversal of your conviction. And so what they've done now, Krasner's office, is offered all sorts of people the chance to plead guilty to a lesser offense, a third degree, say homicide or something, and then get time served, but not an exoneration. So even the sort of very heralded exonerations out of Larry Krasner's office are by and large not exonerations. They're saying there was a problem. We can't really be sure this person is innocent, but you know, we don't think we really can retry it. So judge, decide whether it should be retried or not, or, you know, let them plead guilty to something else. And that's the way it works. There's no prosecutions of these
No
guys.
justice and accountability.
No justice in the
justice and
capitalist
accountability.
courts. No.
Yeah, that's for sure. And Kamillah, your last word and what you would like to see people do who want to support your father so he can get his freedom and you can be with his family.
My last words are, you know, my father is in his 70s now. Anything that he have done, you know, that wasn't openly admitted that he hadn't done, you know, when I'm saying this, I don't want nobody to get my words misconstrued. I feel like anybody that does something in life, if you done something, yeah, okay, serve the consequences. But we have people that came forward that said that my father hadn't done this crime that he's sitting in jail for. So my thing is this: you got almost 30 years of his life. Let him go. Let him go and just let him come home to his family. Let him come home to not only his grandchildren, but he has great grandchildren, because my niece has children, my nephew has children. So let him live out the rest of the days of his life with his family. You know, I mean, he's not a threat to you. He's not a threat to society. He just wants to be, you know, with his family. I mean, y'all had him for all these years. Y'all can give us, you can give him to us for the rest of his years, you know. And I don't think if he comes home, that he will stop fighting for justice, because that's who he is. He's always going to fight for the right thing. He's always going to fight for justice. He's always going to, you know, want, I'll say they call it the underdog. He's going to always want the underdog to win. So, you know, but I think he can do it from a position where, you know, he'll be around the people that he loves. He doesn't always have to, you know, be in a stance where he always feels like he has to fight, because he'll have people around him that love him, you know. So family wise, we just want him home. We just want our dad home. We just want, you know, my children, they just want their grandfather home. We just want him home. That's all, you know. I mean, if I can speak for everybody, as far as my siblings, the damage was already done as far as us growing up without a father. But, you know, they say, you know, they want to give back, well then give back. I mean, they say all the time that, okay, this person needs to be rehabilitated. Well, how much rehabilitation does a person need before you let them go? So, you know, we just want him home. That's all.
Major Tillery is a fighter not only for himself, but many, many others. So I think we have to respect that. And that's important, his fight for justice. So thanks for joining us. We've been talking with Rachel Wolkenstein, who is a political activist and lawyer who works with Major Tillery and Mumia Abu-Jamal for their freedom, and also Kamillah, who's the third daughter of Major Tillery. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Steve, very much. Thank you.